you're one of our guests this morning, we're really glad you're here. Thanks for being with us. It is good to see everybody, and I pray that this morning's been a good morning for you. It's good to be together as God's family. Last week, if you remember, if you were able to be here, or maybe you caught it online if you weren't, we started a new series from the book of Proverbs called Don't Be Foolish, or maybe in our language we say Don't Be Dumb. And so that really is the main message of Proverbs. And last week, the thing we took away was, in our life, instead of living with the question, is it sin? Instead, we should live with the question of, is it what? Okay, so maybe 3 of us were here last week. Now, is it wise? Like, is this a wise thing to do? Not just is it sin, but because we often like to get close to the line and flirt with it, and then cross the line and go all the way into sin. The Proverbs writers, they really live with this idea of, is it wise to do? And so as we start looking in this book of all these different subjects, these different topics, you might say, that the Proverbs writers talk about, we're living with this question of, is it wise? And one subject that Solomon and some others, they really write a lot about is the subject of adultery. It's apparently a pretty big deal to Solomon to mention it. It's apparently relevant to the people he was writing to the young men. It's from a perspective of a father to young sons. You can imagine telling young men about that subject would be very important, but to all people who would read it, he thinks it's important to talk about this subject of adultery. And you might say, well, is it really relevant or needed today? And as I was researching some things, I want to share this with you. In 2002, there was a dating website that was created, and I'm going to say the word dating very loosely. It was made in 2002, and this site was geared towards people who were married. It was a site where you can go to find someone to have an extramarital affair with. That's the whole intention of the site. In fact, here is their slogan. Life is short, have an affair. In 2015, that site was hacked. Everybody who used it, their data was leaked. Many real people, while not all the information people use was real, many people started having to deal with the consequences of their actions, and it was quite big in the news. In fact, they made a Netflix special on this somewhat recently. Now, I have not watched it, so I'm not telling you that's clean or go home and watch it or anything like that, but you wonder, is this subject relevant in our culture and society? Well, let me tell you this. That was hacked in 2015, and you would think that would encourage people maybe to not get involved in this kind of behavior. But yet 5 years later, as of 2020, as they went under new leadership, this site doubled in the amount of users. 70 million people are users on this site. And this is not just a man thing, by the way. Half of the users are women. It is men and women alike. Now let me ask you this. Do you think adultery is relevant to our culture and society? It's a big problem in our culture. And so just as the Proverbs writer needs to talk about it, listen, so do we. We have to. Listen, our culture, I think we can all agree, our culture is pretty foolish about sex. It's pretty foolish about sex. Our culture says that sex needs no covenant. It says marriage is really more of like an I do until I don't want to, is the way many in our culture look at it. If you're to watch anything on the media, what it will teach you is that successful first dates end up in taking someone home, that weekends are meant to find somebody to hook up with, or that if you get out of high school without participating in that mess, well then something's wrong with you. That's what our media teaches people as they grow up in this culture. And that is completely foolish, isn't it? That is the opposite of the wisdom of God. And it shouldn't surprise us that in a lust-led culture that's foolish about all these things and about God's design for marriage and family and sex, that adultery is so prevalent. So, we need to talk about it. Listen, I also know this is not a fun subject to talk about. When I decided to be a preacher, I said, I can't wait to preach on adultery. I know that in this very room, there are people whose lives have been touched and affected by this sin. I know some of you have been raised in a home affected by this sin. You've been affected by cheating, or maybe some of you in this room have been a victim of cheating. you know firsthand the damage this sin does. I also know this morning that there likely might be someone in this room who has been the guilty party, the one who cheated. And you know better than anybody, I would imagine, the damage that this sin does to a life. And I want you to understand this morning, regardless of where you sit, and if you are someone who has been guilty of this, please know that while you will live with the consequences of this action, there is always spiritual reconciliation available in Jesus Christ. And so I hope you don't take from this lesson and just go home feeling so guilty. Now listen, if you're actively participating in this sin, I do hope you go home feeling guilty. That's God's word working. But I want you to know there's always reconciliation available in Jesus. Solomon wrote, these God-inspired words penned by Solomon. It's kind of interesting when you think about Solomon's life. The wisest man to ever live. And if you know anything about Solomon, the subject of adultery goes hand in hand with Solomon. In 1 Kings 11, when it talks about Solomon, earlier in 1 Kings, it tells us, I'll get off that slide. You don't have to look at that forever. It tells us about Solomon that he married the daughter of Pharaoh, and then about 10 chapters later, it tells us that he loved many foreign women. It would say that he loved the women, and he married them from nations. It said, people that you shall not enter into marriage with them, neither shall they with you, for surely they will turn away your heart after their gods. But yet he loved many of them. And it tells us in 1 Kings 11 that he clung to these in love. And he had 700 wives, 300 who were princesses, and 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. And so I don't know if Solomon wrote these words before he left. You can know the right thing to do and fail to do it, can't you? We're all guilty of that. Maybe Solomon wrote these words as a young man and then failed to live up to that standard himself. Or maybe Solomon wrote these words as an older man saying, I've made many, many mistakes. Please listen, this is one of them. Don't be foolish. Don't follow this path that I led to, because they absolutely turned away his heart. In the book of Proverbs, we mentioned this last week, these short little sayings, right? Like actions speak louder than words, and these things like that, these short statements of truth. In the first 9 chapters, there's some context to this book, or there's some sections that build on each other, but it's very just all over the place, so it's not like we can just sit in one text per se and break it all down. But I want you to listen to some of these verses. If you highlight in your Bible, these are great. If you want to write some notes of these, are great. But here, listen to some of these verses in Proverbs 2, 5, 6, or 7 that all speak at length about adultery. Because what Solomon tells us is that when it comes to adultery, it is deceptive and it is damaging. Here comes the father to his sons. We're going to start in Proverbs 2:16. I just want to give you a list of some of these verses. You're going to notice, and I want you to look at how all of these verses sound in common. One thing you'll notice is you might see these different languages of forbidden woman or strange woman. Now listen, ladies, he's not picking on women. This is just from the perspective of a father to a son, so that's how you're going to describe it. But this idea of forbidden or strange literally means like not your woman, like not your authorized wife. This is not the person you're in a covenant with. And by the way, if you're here this morning, you're like, well, hey, I'm not married, I'm single, maybe like I'm widowed, I have no interest in getting married ever again, something like that. Well, all of these verses really still apply to sexual sin in general. And so don't think this doesn't apply to you at all, but just apply it in that way. But here's chapter 2 and verse 16. So you will be delivered from the forbidden woman, from the adulteress with her smooth words. I want you to check the end of that, because this is kind of a theme you're going to see about that Solomon uses as he talks about this woman throughout Proverbs. Her smooth words. Okay, Proverbs chapter 5 and verse 3. Another similar verse about adultery. You'll see some similarities. Forbidden woman once again, but he says, for the lips of a forbidden woman drip honey. Man, they're sweet. They sound sweet. And her speech is smoother than oil. When we think of adultery, don't we typically think of it as a physical sin where it's like we look and we lust that way? We think of it's deceiving in that sense, but yet Solomon over and over again, he's going to talk about how it's deceiving really on a verbal level too. Look at Proverbs chapter 6 and verse 24, another one. He would talk about following wisdom, look for insight. Why? To preserve preserve you from the evil woman, from the smooth tongue of the adulteress. And one more for you. In Proverbs chapter 7 and verse 5, he would say, keep my words, listen to the call of wisdom. Why? To keep you from the forbidden woman, from the adulteress with her smooth words. We often think of adultery as just this very physical sin and a very lust of the eye kind of thing, but yet, and while looks is mentioned in some of the Proverbs about adultery, over and over and over again, you see this language about smooth words. These lips that drip honey or seem sweet. Adultery is not only caused by lust of the eyes. Lust is involved, but yet what he mentions often is that this sin is deceptive. And there is deception involved in this sin. You know, at the heart of every temptation is a lie. I don't know what you're tempted with, but any temptation you have, at the heart of it is a lie. And sin is when we believe a lie and we think that we can get something good out of something that's not good. When we think we can be something that's not good or be someone that God did not make us to be, we believe some type of lie anytime we sin, whether we realize it or not. And every time we're tempted, it's like it's our chance of, hey, Adam and Eve, are you going to eat the apple or not? And every time we're tempted, it's like the apple's right there, and it's, do we believe the lie and we eat, or do we not? And when it comes to the chance to cheat, this temptation is filled with lies too. And listen, here are some of the lies that people use when they cheat. This is how I feel. You know, what I feel is really real. I really love this person. I really feel a certain way about this person. That's one lie. You know, feelings come and go. Love is much more than a feeling, friends. If you watch shows and movies, they'll tell you love is this feeling that's temporary. You'll have it, and as you have it, you love, and then, well, when it goes, it's over. That's not love as God defines and describes it. Love is a choice every day. And marriage is not about feelings of love. Marriage is about commitment. Marriage is about a covenant. Here's another lie. It's harmless. You know, sometimes we say that with any sin that we commit. No, it doesn't affect anybody. Is that true? I mean, on a very basic level, is not every sin that we commit harm God? But even more so than that, it hurts ourselves, doesn't it? And when you think of this sin, I mean, on a very real way, this sin hurts a lot of people. You know, I don't know if when people think about cheating, if they think about sitting across from their husband or wife and telling them what they did one day. I don't know if we think about having to look into our kids' eyes and changing their whole world. You know, I don't think we think about our friends and our jobs and our reputation. It's not harmless, friends. It's a real sin that harms a lot of things. Here's another one. It's similar to number one, but a little different. I deserve to be happy. I deserve it. Do we? You know, marriage isn't about happiness. It's about holiness. That's what that covenant is all about. But so often we live in life like, well, I'm so excited I'm going to cough today, okay? I deserve to be happy. I should have that. I've mentioned this before. When I would go to Choctaw and I would teach Bible class, there was a donut store conveniently on the way to Choctaw's church building. I would grab donuts for Bible class, and on the box it says, "You deserve it." Hey, it sounded great to me, so I ate. But it's a lie, isn't it? Because we don't deserve to be happy if what makes us happy is sin. And also, that action might make us happy for a moment, but do you think it will make us happy forever? No. That sin cannot do what only Jesus can do for us. Sin cannot fill holes within us and in our hearts and truly make us eternally happy. Only Jesus can do that, but sometimes we believe that lie. What about this one? Nobody will know. Nobody will know if I do it. But you know, God will absolutely know. And here's the other truth, is that 9 times out of 10, our sin gets found out, doesn't it? Would we still do it if everybody knew? Here's one more, and maybe here's a big one. Well, this is better than my present marriage. You know, this is that the grass is always greener mentality, right? Man, that life over there I'm imagining, it's better than mine. Or look at them, they have it nice. Maybe with this person, life would be better and my problems would go away, or it'd be a healthier relationship or whatnot. And listen, somebody new will not change our life for the better. Because life will still be filled with the same responsibilities. It will have the same problems. The issues inside ourselves, they won't just leave us when we find someone new. They'll come with us. And while we can be swept up in the excitement, eventually we'll come back to earth and realize we paid too big a price for too small of a return. Our scripture reading this morning said this: "For the lips of a forbidden woman drip honey." They sound so sweet. "And her speech is smoother than oil. But in the end, she is bitter wormwood. Sharp as a two-edged sword. Her feet go down to death. Her steps follow the path to Sheol. She does not ponder the path of her feet. She does not know it." We must hear the wisdom of God. Do not listen to the deception and the lie of this temptation. Don't listen to the lies of sin. Cheating will never provide what it promises. Do you hear me this morning? Cheating will never provide what it seems to promise. So incline your ear to God's word, to his truth, and follow closely. Stay true to your I do. Remember your covenant with your God and your spouse. Don't look for fulfillment in someone else, because if we do, Solomon tells us it causes great damage in our lives and the lives of other people. I want you to look at the way he illustrates the results of this sin in chapter 7. If you're a hunter, I think you'll like the illustration. It'll be very visual to you. But he says in chapter 7, verse 21, "With much seductive speech she persuades him. With her smooth talk she compels him. All at once he follows her, as an ox goes to the slaughter, or as a stag or a deer is caught fast, till an arrow pierces its liver. It's a bird, or as a bird rushes into a snare, he does not know that it will cost him his life." What Solomon does in this book is he almost illustrates it like there is a home on a street corner, and there is a lady who lives there with not a very honorable occupation. And he says, "Sons, don't go near there." And he pictures it like if you walk near there and you go in there, it's going to do some incredible damage on your life. And he's saying, please, please, don't go in that house. Don't go near that woman. Same thing for the ladies. Don't go to his house. Don't talk to that person. It will do great damage on your life. See, adultery, it is a sin like all other sins. It can be forgiven, but this decision has consequences that destroy parts of lives when we choose to cheat. We know this, it often ends marriages. Jesus gave that clause for divorce and remarriage as he spoke about physical unfaithfulness. It hurts and it sometimes ruins relationships with children. It can affect your children in many ways as they grow up that you'll never know, from their patterns and habits to their behaviors and their thoughts about relationships and things of that nature. It's ruined careers and reputations. Do we have any golf fans in here? Tiger Woods, remember that story, that scandal? He has not been the same since then, has he? Granted, he still makes loads of cash, but his sponsorships were all lost by half. His health, because as he fought, as that whole truth got revealed to his wife, there were wrecks and injuries that he's never been the same physically again. And his reputation will always be linked back to that, unfortunately. This it hurts, and it hurts a lot of people, but listen, it hurts you. And this isn't just true with adultery. This is true with all sexual sin. Paul would say in 1 Corinthians 6:18, "Flee from sexual immorality. Every other sin a person commits is outside the body, but the sexually immoral person sins against his own body." We don't realize this, but sexual sin kind of does something to us in a way that we might not understand, but it does damage upon our own body. We have some very real illustrations of that in the Bible, don't we? Of the damage of this sin. Think about David. He sees a woman bathing on a rooftop. I don't know what that's all about, by the way. Do you? You ever wondered about that whole thing? Why is that a cultural thing? Just put the bathtub inside. Close the curtain. But he sees this woman, Bathsheba. He takes her to be his own. He has relations with her. He wants to cover up his sin. Well, maybe I'll bring her husband back home from war and he will, lay with her. And he doesn't. Well, maybe if I get him drunk, he'll lay with her. And he doesn't. I'll stick him in the front lines and he dies to cover my own sin. And finally, David was revealed. Nathan comes and says, you are the man. Look what you've done. You're the one who's committed this sin. And so David repents, but there were still consequences for his action. He could be made whole with God when he repented, but there were still consequences. They both suffered. They lost their son, and they suffered the damage of this sin. Listen, sin will take you farther than you want to go. It will keep you longer than you want to stay, and it will cost you more than you want to pay. And that's been a quote used often for sin, and it's true in this sin too. And how you get there. You ever wondered how people get to this sin? Because this is an extreme step, wouldn't you say, in a relationship? To go from committed to this. And it's like, how do you get there? Well, let me tell you. Can I tell you this morning? Please be aware of emotional adultery. If you're going to give your body to someone else, where it starts is you give your heart or your mind to someone else. Mike Pence made a comment, and this is a rule he lives by, and it's not original to him, but he talked about how he is never alone with a woman who is not his wife. And you looked on social media and the news, and they flamed him for it. Like that was such a dumb thing for him. Are you not confident in your relationship, and are you not self-controlled? And this is a rule that goes back, that's called the Billy Graham rule, and they taught us this in school, and they're like, that's so dumb. That's wise. That's why, like, if you're married, I shouldn't be having one-on-one conversations with people who aren't my wife in depth. I shouldn't be on the phone with them for an hour. I probably shouldn't have solo messages with them on social media. Like, I need to protect my marriage. There's nothing more important than that. Like, be wise about this. It starts emotionally when there's people that we start giving our heart to and our mind to. And instead of turning to our husband or our wife, we find someone else for that. It starts there. I'll tell you also, virtual adultery. We have a whole other category of this now, don't we? Jesus would say in the Sermon on the Mount, it's not just if you look at woman with a lustful intent, you've committed adultery in your heart. We have a whole other thing. And when you're caught up in virtual adultery, sometimes it leads you to commit it physically. Be wise. And what does Solomon say to do? Because if this is such a serious sin that causes so much damage, what do we do? And I think there's really two ways, or two actions, maybe not be everything, but two actions we can do so we can not be foolish about adultery. Number one is simple. Be wise and stay away. Like, stay away. He would tell his sons, listen to me and do not depart the words of my mouth. Keep your way far from her. Stay far from her. Do not go near the door of her house. It is much easier for us to stay away from temptation than to walk away once we've gotten involved. It may require drastic measures, but when we're tempted to cheat, don't walk away, run. Run. Listen, if you have to change your circle of friends to not cheat, change your circle of friends. If you have to get a different job, get a different job. If you have to live in a different neighborhood, move. If you have to work out at home instead of the gym, work out at home. If you got to delete an app or get rid of a device, adios. Get rid of it, because he says stay away from that which is going to lead you down this path. Don't go there. None of those things is worth more than your marriage. But he would also say this: be wise and invest in your marriage. One of the best ways you can avoid this sin is to really pour into your marriage. Solomon says this also in chapter 5. Water from your own cistern, flowing water from your own well. Should your springs be scattered abroad, streams of water in the streets, let them be for yourself alone, and not for strangers with you. Let your fountain be blessed, and rejoice in the wife of your youth. A lovely deer, a graceful doe, let her breasts fill you at all times with delight. Be intoxicated always in her love. What Solomon says here, Paul would also mention in 1 Corinthians, that one of the best deterrents to sexual temptation and sin is having a healthy sexual relationship with your spouse. Serve each other and enjoy each other. We don't like to talk about this. It's icky. We don't want to talk about it. We have to. But one of the best deterrents from sexual sin in our lives is if we have a healthy sexual relationship with our spouse. Let it be habitual. It should be. Let it be consistent. You watch TV and it's like it's one thing one spouse holds over the other. Like if you do these 1,800 things, maybe. That's not what it was designed to be in a marriage. Don't use it as a bargaining chip. Healthy marriages make time for physical intimacy and they make time for sexual intimacy. And I know at different ages, there's different, things change or whatnot, but yet in healthy marriages, this is a consistent practice. By the way, if you're a podcast person, can I encourage you, go listen to Trey and Leah Morgan. They have a podcast, members of the church. He's a preacher out in Lubbock. They have a huge following for their marriage podcast, and they talk about anything and everything, like young couples, young marrieds. It's a great podcast. Anybody. If you can go there, there's a lot of resources. But I wanted to encourage you to do that. But he says invest in your marriage physically, but also just overall at large. Instead of wondering if the grass is greener on the other side, like water the grass you're standing on. Like water the grass that you own, that you're a part of. Instead of imagining a life with someone else, invest in the relationship and person you've committed to. Like, why put all the effort into finding someone new when you can put that effort into strengthening your God-accepted marriage? That's what he says to do. Listen, if there's issues within your marriage that you're stuck on, you're not communicating well, it doesn't seem to go away, you're not growing in it, go see somebody. One of the favorite things the elders here said to me when they hired me was, hey, by the way, when people come to you for counseling, there's going to be situations you're not going to know what to say or how to handle. We know professional, good Christian counselors, and we want to encourage people to go. We'll help them find it. We'll help them do it. Like, if that's you, we have shepherds we have resources we want to help you with. But if you're stuck in that spot in your marriage and you're imagining this life, or you're struggling with areas, go see somebody. Invest in your marriage. And those are two tips, invest and stay away. And they're not the only pieces of wisdom, but yet for Solomon, it's a start. Stay away, don't get near it, and invest in your marriage. I think about that slogan on that site. Life is short, have an affair. Listen, life is short, be wise. Don't listen to that junk. That might be what you're taught everywhere you look in the world, but that's not wise. Life is short, be wise. If you're doing this right now, stop. Stay away, invest in your marriage. If you're participating in virtual adultery, stop. Stay away, invest, see someone, find help. If you're single, stop. If you're participating in this in other ways, stop. Invest in your future marriage, Lord willing. Because life is short, so be wise. Jesus will come again, and he wants to find us living out his words, and that includes faithfulness to him, but faithfulness to the people we're committed to. So let's be faithful people. I would ask you this morning, are you married to Jesus? Are you married to Jesus? We're talking about being married and being in a covenant relationship with our spouse and being faithful, but are you married to Jesus? Are you a part of his bride, his church? If he came today, would you be found faithful and a part of his people? Or would you be found with someone else? Because he wants to come and find his people faithful. And this morning, if we can help you become a part of his people, if we can help you to put him on in baptism, or maybe if we can help you, and maybe it's a private thing, if we can help you in your marriage or in a relationship or with a sin that you're struggling with that we mentioned this morning, come down now while we stand and while we sing.